Hi, everybody. I think I'm ready, right? All right. I know that you guys have been waiting and waiting, and we are like the most exciting event, right? Yeah, I can see it in your faces. I come to you today on behalf of the Bureau of Industry and Security, which is an agency within the Department of Commerce. We used to be a part of the International Trade Administration, and then they understood the magnificence of export controls and how you didn't really want to have a conflict of interest. So those of you who might be old enough to remember, but you look so young, so a lot of you were really, really young in the 80s, right? So when we became a full agency, we continued our duties, and things have gotten more complicated ever since. So today I come to you, Office of Export and Services, my colleagues and I, East and West Coast. I'm here with my colleague from the outreach, the magnificent outreach group, educational services from the East Coast and headquarters, Angela. And we have a colleague from the West Coast, Brian, who's also going to be participating and interacting with you later today after we do our little short version, not enough to annoy you, but enough to either introduce or refresh your memories about export controls and how they play into you or your clients. Because I know we have counselors here, and I think we have business people, actual entrepreneurs or business owners, or those who work in companies where a large portion, if not all, of their trade is in exports. And we define exports because that's something that is actually leaving the United States going to a foreign destination. And we define re-exports, things that are leaving the foreign destination and going to another foreign destination. But in this case, you are looking at concentrating for a few minutes. Don't have a long time. Don't worry. We will be here to answer questions or ponder issues with you tomorrow at a booth or at a table. So what you don't get in today, do not fear. You can find us later today while we're still here, or more importantly, all day tomorrow. So welcome to the universe of export controls. You or your clients always are considering who you're selling to, what you're selling, where you're selling it, and what else? What's going to be done with your product. That's a cheat sheet to begin with. You can begin a cheat sheet with that. What, who, where, and what else? Also, as a cheat sheet, and I do this, and sometimes my colleagues and those don't like it. For those of you who know what the Export Administration regulations look like in Part 15 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, in Part 730 to 774, we have a part of our portion of that CFR in Part 732 that is labeled Steps for Using the EAR. My ego is not hurt. If I lose you today, you can go behind me and look at Part 732 and steps for using the EAR for those of you to whom this might be a new venture, and refresh the memory of those who is not. Also, the scope of our regulations. In other words, what's subject to, what's really not, in Part 734. If you don't look at anything else, if you get those two parts, if I lose you today, you can figure out how the Export Administration regulations under the Bureau of Industry and Security and the Department of Commerce fits into your client's trade transaction, proposed, repeat, whatever. Because there should be a checklist that says of all the things you're considering, how you're going to finance it, whether you want to deal with this person because they've been reliable or not, they're going to buy more or less, how often they'll do it, whether you use letters of credit. But more importantly, there should be a portion on there that says export controls. And one of the areas of export controls, primarily under the government, falls to the Bureau of Industry and Security. We emphasize this because while other agencies that you also may be dealing with, or your clients may be dealing with, have export control jurisdiction for the U.S. export controls, we have the largest as we understand it. Over 95% of what leaves the United States is probably under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Industry and Security, the Export Administration regulations. So I know that excites you to have to keep up with something else. But all you can do is, I don't know, try to do the best you can on that checklist and say, we have looked to see if there is a requirement that our client or that our company get an authorization to move something out of the United States in order for us to fulfill this transaction so that you can get your money. And we have helped facilitate legitimate and prosperous trade. So we bring greetings of peace and prosperity to you today. I'm a part of the Regulatory Policy Division. We are affectionately called and simply called the Reg Writers. Angela and Brian are part of the esteemed education and counseling, the outreach. They're the first line of meeting the public, the trading public, or anybody who is counseling the trading public. I would go ahead and use this quote to introduce ourselves today. The true alchemists do not change lead into gold. They change the world into words. That's what we do as reg writers. We change your world of transaction into words, and those words you need to understand about what requirements come to you or your clients to make sure that you got the right authorization to send those items into international atmosphere, global trade. And we do that for certain reasons. Are you with me about why I'm here today? Okay, great. Ooh, you are screen sharing. Well, if you can see above that, let me explain quickly the mission. The mission, as I've talked about it, is to help you understand whether you have authorization. And the reason why we need to make sure you have authorization is because we have a job to advance national, U.S. national security, foreign policy, and economic objectives by ensuring an effective export control and treaty compliance system and promoting continued U.S. strategic technology leadership. Fundamentally, you can track it there with that link that we list there for you for the address. We're saying there's national security and foreign policy reasons that sometimes we put our nose in your transaction for the interests of the country, because while we're trying to advance economic prosperity, we also want to secure the interests of all of us, including our allies. Okay. Do I need to advance it this way? Let's see. I'm sure it's me. Huh? Oh, that's government printing office. Well, we can't really get our new regulations for them these days. Everybody's in still a little funk because of the pandemic. Let me see if I can try this again. Okay, so I can't do that, but my next slide. Yeah. But I can explain this to you while we go, because we won't have a whole lot of time. But remember, introduction, refresher. The first chunk of slides, basically slides 1 through 4, and you've seen the first one, the second one, are basically explaining to you what BIS and the Export Administration regulations actually are. So we're almost through with that one. Okay. This is the third slide. Here you see that there are other agencies that also have jurisdiction. Just goes along with just what I said. If we have 95 to 99% of what's hopping around out there and trying to make its way across the border, then there are others that also have jurisdiction. Some of you may not only be involved in commercial and certain munitions items trade, but you also may be dealing in extreme, only high level, really exciting, extraordinary, big type munitions. That is the Department of State. That is the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, or DDTC. Now, sometimes defense gets involved and they have their Defense Security Agency, Trade and Security Agency, DITSA, but they don't have regulations for items that are mostly arms, munitions, like the State Department. So if you're a counselor and you said, well, I wasn't sure which agency with your export control jurisdiction I should go to. If you're not sure about us, look at state. And then there's also the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which I affectionately, and I'm gonna whisper it to you, call them the big gorilla. They're the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to sanctions. When you hear sanctions, usually OFAC at Treasury has the primary jurisdiction on exacting those. But we fill in where we need to, where there are blanks in our regulations for commercial items and some munitions items under the export administration regulations, just to make sure that we don't leave any gaps. But mainly sanctions is OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. So you have the main agencies here. There are other agencies. Energy has them. Which other agency has the parks? There are different agencies that deal with interior. They have jurisdiction. So you always want to check that you're dealing with or consulting information for the main agency with export control jurisdiction that says, yeah, you're getting ready to move this item from here out of the United States to someplace else, but you're going to need authorization. And those authorizations can come in the manner of an actual license that has to be applied for, or under certain circumstances, there's license exceptions. And there are times you don't need a license at all, but you've heard from Census and the wonderful automated export system folk at Census, and you have to file certain things. And in filing, even though you didn't need a license, you still need to know what you were dealing with so you can put in the correct codes. So when we start getting to slides 5 through 12, there are going to be 4 factors, and I've given you a hint about those before, about you or your constituents and what you need to make sure that you are evaluating properly the main factors to determine what your export control requirements or obligations are. Then when we get to slides 13 through 16, the main question you ask, if you don't ask anything else in the world regarding the export administration regulations, am I or is my transaction subject to? So we discuss how you deal with that information and make that determination. And the last one, where I will be tag-tailed here today by my colleague Angela to describe the act of submitting a license application. If we go from slides 1 through 16 and on part 17, if you realize that you are subject to and a license is required, you need to know how to apply for a license. That's real simple. Everything we're going to talk about until we end this relationship with you today should be pretty simple, pretty direct. You know, if you get a ticket, you got to go pay it, or at least go to court to fight it. It's just that simple. Life is like that. You know how the rules work. You just want to apply them properly. The multilateral export control regimes. How do we decide how we're going to control items? To what degree? Under what particular area? Foreign policy, national security. United States, like people, belong to organizations, like-minded organizations, where all our goals, at least most of them, and our policies can be fulfilled. So, Varsna arrangement. Those of you who possibly are old enough to remember, that used to be the coordinating committee called COCOM. That is where primarily the national security controls are decided upon. And the United States is a member of the Varsna arrangement, formerly known as the coordinating committee. The Australia group. Here, we are dealing with chemical and biological weapons. So items that are controlled for those reasons, the United States participates in that group to help design, set what policies and controls will be set up. The missile technology control regime, on its face, missile technology, things shooting, moving, it is a primary reason for control, and we participate in that group. And the nuclear suppliers group, that speaks for itself, nuclear weapons. We also used to refer to most often for weapons of mass destruction. So all of these kind of can be a weapons of mass destruction, but national security, NS, that would be for the Varsna arrangement that used to be COCOM. The Australia group, for purposes of proliferation of chemical and biological weapons control, BC. Missile Technology Control Regime, MT. Nuclear Suppliers Group, NS. So you got the organizations that help set the policy and the controls, and you have the abbreviations that will come back to you soon and basically form the foundation of the reasons for control for items possibly needing a license, or at least needing to be evaluated in such ways that you can keep up with how an item is being used, where it's going, and who's going to get it. The export control system. Items subject to the EAR. If we don't have any say, we don't have any say. But always remember, if it's not us, and an item is leaving the United States, so someone has jurisdiction over that item who's based in the United States, then in that case, you might need to look at another agency. So if it's not us, be sure to look at the other agencies: State, Treasury, Energy. The scope of the EAR: export. I kind of briefly explained to you what an export is. Item is actually leaving the United States. So re-export. Item has gone from the United States in a foreign territory and is now going to another foreign territory. Transfers in country. Sometimes an item gets to a foreign destination and moves around in that destination. There are things that you should be concerned about regarding that. Certain foreign products, because there are certain foreign products that somebody has used US technology, intellectual property, but they may have made it with their materials or whatever, but we still can have jurisdiction. Certain activities by US persons. Actually in 744.6, that's part 744, but it's 0.6 section. There are things that US persons can do that will pull them in, and there are regulatory requirements. And there are some restrictions on some of those on those activities. Primarily, you can guess. We don't want you facilitating weapons of mass destruction. We don't want you facilitating terrorist activities. We don't want you facilitating something illegal under our regulations, anything that might harm our national security interests or our foreign policy interests. Another hint there, when I say foreign policy, national security is national security, NS controls. When I talk about foreign policy, it's like an umbrella, and you have things that fall under foreign policy like anti-terrorism, which is AT. I mean, it's a bigger umbrella. We have things under like crime control, CC, that's a foreign policy control. MT actually ends up being a foreign policy control. If it is not NS, national security, then everything else, those abbreviations I've given you, those reasons for control, fall under the basic umbrella of a foreign policy objective. I've given you 734. The part 730 at the bottom gives you general information on the authority to do what we do and the history. And the 734 is the scope of the EAR and what is subject to and what is not. Cheat sheet, before you even saw the slide, if you can remember these things, this is how you can evaluate how part 730 through 774 comes into play in your transaction, your planned transaction, or your client's transaction. Because before that item goes out, and actually before they sign an agreement and contract with somebody who themselves might be listed or would be a person of concern, you want to know what it is. You should always know. You or your client or your manufacturers know what their item is. They know what it's intended to do. They know what it's made of. They should know where it's going. If you have a client who wants you to send something to a destination and you go, oh, no, we haven't been doing business that way. You need to know where your item is going. You need to know who will receive it. Have you known this person long enough? Are they legitimate? Do they pay on time? What connections? Some people might say that's being nosy. However, it is your money, your status, and the fate of your business sometimes. Because as I explained to Karen, Shannon, and everybody, we aren't enforcement. We're on the export administration side. So BIS is broken down into two sides: export administration, export enforcement. We are the reg writers, interpreters, outreach. We administer, we license. Export enforcement as you can imagine. They carry badges and guns. So they are the people who ferret out and deal with violations of the EAR. You want to be sure that if you, for the sake of your business and the good of national security and the good of home, you just want to know who you're dealing with. And as they say, don't self-blind. I know everybody wants to make money, but is it worth it to do that and have to go down that long road of jurisprudence, or to have your name and your slide up there on something so everybody else can see how export enforcement found a violation and this is how they dealt with it? But they really are good, good men and women. I call them cowboys, cowgirls, but they really are great law enforcement people. And they are trying to secure and protect, just as we are in the way we write these regulations and judge what needs to be amended to set up regulations so that you will know what your obligations are. What is your item? Where is it going? Who will receive it? What else? What is the end use? If you can answer all those questions, if you don't do anything else, and deal with part 730 to 774, you should be able to help yourself or your clients figure out what their obligations are and meet them under the EAR. This is basically the commerce control list, because sometimes you will have an item that is nowhere listed. It is on a list, and we have 600-700 items out of all those 95% of what we have that's under our jurisdiction. Those few, as I might call that, 500 and 600 items, are set up. It's not like a Dewey Decimal System, but there is a system to putting those items on the Commerce Control List in Supplement 1 to Part 774. You will learn how to track whether the item you're dealing with or your client is dealing with is on the list. And if it is, basically being on the list means it presumptively has a license requirement. But the way it's set up is in categories, as you see here, and then product groups. And you probably will recognize some of these. If you get to Supplement 1 to Part 774, this is how it will be set up. The categories will go 0 through 9, and in between, in each one of those categories, will be these product groups for hardware, software, technology. Primarily A, C, and D is what you're looking at. There are other letters in between, but you're looking for A for hardware. We have materials. That's more C. D is software, and E is technology. If you can correlate those, and if your client or you know how to describe your item, then you should be able to track it in Part 774. You don't have to learn it all today. It's just a scheme of it. Do I know what my main category of item is? You see that 0 through 9. Once I can pick one of those, then in each one of those categories, those pages, you will look for those letters in the product group and then see which one describes something close to what your item is. You are a long way towards determining whether your item presumptively needs a license because it's on the Commerce Control List. Another cheat sheet, if you look at Part 738, it will explain the reasons for control, the Commerce Control List, all at your leisure. It's like great fun reading, Part 738, that breaks this down to you. So don't worry if I lose you. 738 will explain this Commerce Control List, the reasons and how it works. Yes, ma'am. No, they are listed. That's a great question. I'll pay you when this is over. What happens? She asked, do all the EAR 99 items, did you say that they require a license? EAR 99 is the huge bucket of items. And that's why I said the Commerce Control List has about 600 items. The rest of the items of that 95% of what we control that goes out of the United States is EAR 99. It is a bucket. It presumptively does not need a license. It's under our jurisdiction, but does not need a license. The only time in EAR 90, because we don't know what to call all those items, but Let's just say some of those circumstances change and that client of yours gets into a little something, or your client's client overseas gets into a little something. You can take an EAR 99 presumptive transaction that does not need a license, doesn't need that type of authorization, and then you can pull it into a licensable event. Thank you for asking that question. I promise I'll meet you after this. Okay. All right. So, any other questions? Commerce control list, supplement 1 to part 774. And if it's not there, but it is still described as a type of item under our jurisdiction, it is EAR 99. Presumptively, no license required. But you need to be able to keep that EAR 99 in mind, because that's the type of code you might need to use in your export clearance. That's an example we just throw in here to show you what a commerce control list export control classification number, affectionately referred to as ECCN. It is that item that's the way it's listed on the commerce control list. So the first number shows you the category. And once you leave the category, the next character is a letter. And that A is going to get you into hardware. The other 3 characters are numbers arranged a certain way, with the last one basically telling you that you will find things in chronological order. Those zeros let you know what type of reason for control and what priority. Do not stress this. Look at part 738. It explains and breaks this down for you. But this is an example of what an export control classification number, an ECCN on the commerce control list would look like. And if this were your item, you would presumptively have a license requirement. So it is telling you the reason for control, and you see the little written reason. It describes the item, optical equipment and components. License requirement is for national security, and what's the AT? Anti-terror, right. So you have the reason for control, you know what it is, and you need to read the whole entry just to be sure your item, if you think this is your item by description, to see if everything flows towards your needing a license requirement. Because you will then take this information and go back to the commerce country chart. And if there's an X in the box for your destination, then you probably need a license. So part 774, the commerce control list and the commerce country chart play hand in hand. I'm going to a destination. I have this item I want to send to that destination. I look up my item to see if it's on the list. If it has a reason for control, I'll see if that applies to me by going to that chart, because I'm going back to look at my destination. X in the box. X's become great letters in this exercise. Is there an X in the box? Now, you're not always trapped, but at least you can see how you might be trapped initially. But sometimes there's some way out. There's some way out. Oh, let me go back to this. That shows you how dynamic the EAR happens to be. In this slide, you see at the bottom, GBS and CIV. We have, you'll know, you always want to keep up with the updated versions of the commerce control list, because things change, entries change, items are removed, those ECCNs are changed, requirements change. We have since, in the last couple of years since the pandemic, we have removed CIV, which is the civil in use, which is found in part 740. That's where license exceptions are. CIV is a license exception. It no longer exists. And the parameters of the GBS, which means most countries in country group B, because those are friendly countries. Those are allied countries. Those are countries of which we have no concern, not big concern. We have changed that and added an F, a small F paragraph to that. So dynamic is the word we would use to describe all the provisions of the EAR, but clearly when you have the commerce control list and you have learned how to use it, and you can find whether you have an ECCN whether your item is important enough to have been listed as presumptively needing a license on the Commerce Control List. Otherwise, what did we say? With the help of our colleague here, it is EAR 99 if it is still the type of item we have jurisdiction over. EAR 99, ECCN, those are the two things you're looking for. EAR 99, not on the list, but we have jurisdiction, but we presumptively have no license requirement. ECCN, the Export Control Classification Number, presumptively it's important enough to be on the Commerce Control List, and you probably need a license. What are the reasons for control? This is for your study. I think I've given you most of them by heart. I think my feeble mind can keep up with most of this, but there's so many of them. These abbreviations mean these are the reasons for control, and they should be reflected in the abbreviation on the Commerce Control List. You'll see the little abbreviations, and you're going to take that back to the Commerce Country Chart, and those abbreviations are there. So there's method to the madness. One thing leads you to another. And if all else fails, go to part 732. Steps to using the EAR. Just in case I lose you, it will take you through each thing I'm talking about. Steps to using the EAR. Part 738, explaining the Commerce Country Chart and the X's in the box and the reasons for control. Part 774 is where you find the Commerce Control List. Those are probably the most important in helping you understand how to use EAR. What I'm sure you want to do is not be subject at all. But if it's not us, it's probably going to be somebody else if it's leaving the country. Where is it going? This is the way that Commerce Country Chart looks in Supplement 1 to Part 738. See, I didn't lie about those X's in the box. It's really small, but the X's in the box. So the countries in alphabetical order. Oh, sorry. The countries listed to the my right axis, and then they correlate to X's in the box for the reasons for control at the top. Right now, that doesn't seem too simple. I'm happy if you think so. Shouldn't be. You know your country, you know your customer, you know what they're going to do, and you know what you're trying to move or sell to them. This is the important thing, and sometimes what exporters or business people find hard. What's the end use? What is the end use? Who is the end user? These are end user controls. In part 744 of the EAR, we talk about end user controls. That is really important. You know what you intended that your customer do with the item. You know where you intended for it to go. But learning about the person or the company you're dealing with is a different issue. So you and your clients need to get better at understanding who their prospective or their ongoing clients are. So we list here, you can study this at your leisure. These are the various end user controls that are paramount importance to us. And we talked about the weapons of mass destruction, but now we talk about end user controls because we want to know who and what is going on, how things are to be used. Nuclear, missile tech, certain worldwide restrictions for the use and delivery of WMD. Chemical and biological, we talked about the CB, MT, NS controls. Maritime nuclear propulsion, that's a mouthful. It is a concern for us. Activities of U.S. persons do not facilitate bad things. Certain foreign aircraft or vessels. The entity list, which everybody has heard of now, is now used to identify those who are engaged in certain practices that are a threat to national security. They're on the list, and you would check the supplement 4 to part 744 to see how they're listed, when they were listed, and the scope of the restriction. Is it certain items or is it all items subject to the EAR? We talk about OFAC, the Foreign Assets Control, because they have their SDN list. They have specially designated persons. That's not us, it's their list. The unverified list is a list that export enforcement comes up with after they are having difficulty checking end uses overseas. And the unverified list is developed from them. In addition to, they do that table of denial orders, which means you cannot engage or do business with people on that list. That is an export enforcement list. Microprocessors, we have military in-use concerns. Country group D1, that's a national security group. Those are countries we have concern for because of national security reasons. Military in use and military intelligence. All these are saying is these categories of things, the Department of Commerce, BIS, Export Administration Regulations say we control and we look for things because of these concerns. Who is it going to? Just to reinforce it, prohibited parties. These lists are on what they call a consolidated list. And Jerry is back here. He knows famously about that consolidated list because it is a list put together to make it easier for exporters or those who are helping exporters look to see whether their names of their clients or any associates are on there, and therefore it's causing you some concern. And you may need to request, if it's item under our jurisdiction, that you would send those, you would ask for a license, apply for a license. Consolidated screening list, that's to help you check off that box for the export controls. It's a way of pulling together the list for you so that you can determine whether you have some party involved in your transaction that may cause you to require a license application be submitted. And as you can see, different agencies have jurisdiction. We don't control what state does with their debarred list, which is equivalent to our table of denial orders, a denied persons list, or their non-proliferation list, which has a lot to do with it's like our entity list. And then you have the Department of Treasury. Don't they have a lot of lists? Oh, wow. But anyway, they're specially designated persons. You really have to keep up with them. But each of these agencies or departments have numbers and people you can contact. I'm going to talk to you just briefly before you get into, after you've gone through this evaluation and you have determined we think we need to send in a license because we have a little issue with who we're trying to deal with, or the item we have can't really go to this destination. Sometimes if an item is below a certain value in US control content, we say, okay, never mind. You just have to learn how to calculate it. That is what we call a de minimis content. So item is over seas and you're trying to re-export it. You got it out, but you're going to re-export it. You're saying, I think this is going to have a content value of controlled US content. And with that level, I won't need a license, but it is controlled content. And that is how you would learn to evaluate that. You look in 734.734 is where de minimis is all explained and how to calculate it. And I think in part 732, they have a chart and a long listing of de minimis and how different things should be done. And this is US control content, okay? US control content you're having to evaluate. The foreign direct product rule basically is saying a foreign item, everything about it is foreign except the intellectual property or the technology that was used, the creativity that was used to make it. That is generally not a huge issue. You almost have to back into it. There's essentially criteria that said there were factors in your being able to determine whether something would be caught by the foreign direct product rule. You can still do that. And you can look at that in 734.9. I will mention, but I'll only mention briefly because we're almost through. We're a little off, but we're almost through. Due to the rising number of rules that have been generated primarily about Russia and Belarus, also China, the foreign direct product rule, now when it comes to items that somebody intends to send to those destinations or they plan to send someplace else to where those destinations, those governments own things that will be working on items. Almost everything is going to require a license, and the licensing review is going to be presumptively denied. That's all I can talk about that. Anything going on, you can call our agency. You have our contact. That's fundamentally what you would understand. The foreign direct product rule has become more expansive because of 2 or 3 destinations. That's all about war, and that's all about not trying to help those destinations increase and further substantiate their military. It's also about China not trying to use integrated chips and things to use design so that they can enhance and fabricate items. And therefore, what the United States has done, at least under the EAR, is to close the gap in the regulations so that now even these sort of things that could have been used to exempt you when it comes to those destinations, it's going to put you in an area of license required and a presumption of denial of that license application. Question? Oh, the rules started out in October. There's just been lots of rules. I brought some samples which I can talk to you later today or tomorrow if you want to sit down and go through that. So these regulations have been in place since the end of 2022, and there are variations on those regulations taking place. That's why I can't give you all the details on them. But if it's those destinations, the best advice, then ask the question first for those purposes. So de minimis and foreign direct product for any other destination should work as normal. So if you're looking in Part 734, you read how they work, just follow the guidelines, and you should still be either on case by case or presumption of approval if a license is required because of de minimis. But remember, de minimis, you have US content that's controlled. It is below a certain level. And therefore, the United States said, okay, if it is the foreign direct product, you mean some foreign destination, somebody has created something from our know-how, and you are going to find the guidelines to see if that works. If it is other than those 3 destinations I talk about, you shouldn't really have any problems. That's the only hiccup. And you can see why it probably makes sense given these war times and the competition and the national security interests. Hope it didn't lose you. We'll be here to talk to you later about that, and we'll have some numbers for people to contact because we have some of the rules, and they will help you. The most recent rule, which should summarize everything, was published May 23rd. Actually, May 23rd, 2023. Let me give you the citation, and it will run you down for all the things that have happened for those destinations and restrictions. It was 88 FR 33422, and it was published May 23rd, 2023. That will give you more background and implementation of those new restrictions that I was talking about for those destinations. It should give you a history and give you whatever's been augmented. Okay? Didn't mean to scare you, but you wanted to know, right? It's better to know. Okay, great. Okay, so these are license exceptions in 740. In Part 740, we have license exceptions. They like de minimis and foreign direct product for all other normal destinations. You may be able to use these to, in transaction by transaction, figure out if you did normally need a license, that a license exception might be available. Part 740. I would start with Part 740.2, which gives you restrictions on all license exceptions, and then you can read the license exceptions, each one of them in Part 740. And they usually gear towards country groups, which is also in Part 740. A, B, D, and E, those are the country groups. You can imagine A gets the best, B, we don't really care about, they're sort of neutral. D, we have concerns for national security. And E, they are embargoed countries. Part 740, license exceptions. And the better and more favorable the group, the more likely a license exception will exist. So you always hope your country may be in country group A or B. And when I say your country, the one to which you plan to export. It's been a pleasure. My esteemed colleague, Angela, is going to come up, talk to you, and help you if you find out, hey, I think I'm going to need a license. And all I can say to you, keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. Know this, you are the alchemist. Be positive. You have the capacity to turn any situation into your personal victory, into gold. If you choose, what do you want to sculpt? It's clay. It's not meant to be perfect, but your touch can turn it into a masterpiece if you decide. And remember, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. Just go for it. And Angie's going to end this, and we've enjoyed being here, and we'll be around tomorrow. So Angie's going to do that for you.
Okay, so we're actually past our time. So I'm going to give you some information just so you have an understanding. So basically, Sheila's told you about how you determine jurisdiction, you identify your classification, use the Commerce Country Chart, see if there's an X in the box, if the license is required. If there's an X in the box, you first see if there's an exception available. If there's no exception available at that point, that's when you have to apply for an export license. It's the final option. So we do that electronically through the Simplified Network Application Process Redesign, what we call it SNAP-R. We've been having some problems with it, so I'll tell you in advance in the last, some technical problems, but on regular days, you just go to the BIS website under the tab that says licensing. You'll see the option for SNAP-R. You'll see where it says online registration. You just click on the link and it will take you to the registration. Complete the application. It's just a couple of questions about your address and information about your company. Check both boxes and hit submit. Within an hour after you hit that, you'll receive an email. It'll ask you to verify your email address. Respond to the email for your verifying your email address. You will then receive a second email, which will have a link, and we will assign you a company identification number, which you will use to activate your account by creating a login ID and a password. At that point, you should be able to submit your application. It takes about 2 hours on a day when everything's working to get access to SNAP-R. Once you've created your document, if you have all the information, it takes you 5 minutes to create the document. The time frame comes in with the processing time. Okay. Who can apply for an export license? Any person that's in the U.S. You don't have to be a U.S. person, but you do have to be physically in the U.S. Because a lot of times people will come in and they'll be here for 6 months to a year. During that time, they may find things they want to export. And you would use the address where you're actually located at the time to register for SNAP-R, and then you would then be able to submit your application. Support documentations, it's a limitation on what's required. It says it's on the application. Basically, as you read through 748, it tells you based on your transaction itself, whether or not there's any support documentation required. At a minimum, most applications at any given time may require a BIS 711. That's a statement by ultimate consignee and purchaser, where you just send it to the person in country, they'll fill it out and they'll send it back. Basically, it's more of a informing. So it's more opportunity for you to inform individuals because the regulations follow the item. Even though it's outside the US, in most cases, it's still subject to the regulations if it's going to be somewhere else. The status of an export license, when you create the application, it's accepted. During the course of time, it's standard time is 39 to 45 days from the time you submit the application. We all understand it's on a case-by-case basis. I can say 39 to 45 days, depending on the ECCN, country of destination, end user, and end use. It could be 75 days, could be 90 days. But each time it's actually based on a case-by-case basis, and they're looking at the end user, the end use, and the ECCN itself. Sometimes your application will come back on HWA, hold without action. If it's on hold without action based on the fact that the licensing officer that's reviewing the application needs some additional information, they will send you a message through your SnapR account. You have 10 days to respond to that. If you don't respond, they will close it and then they'll actually return without action. You'll have to resubmit. So they give you 10 days to respond. Sometimes it's on hold without action based on an internal requirement for BIS. In that case, you wouldn't receive anything. You would just know that when you go in and check the status, it may say HWA, and you can give us a call and counseling, and we'll be able to look it up and tell you it's internal. There's nothing that you need to do because you didn't see a notice in your SnapR account. It's always going to say pending while it's working. For an export license, once it's in, it's 9 days in commerce. Then it goes out for interagency clearance. Interagency clearance is a 30-day process. It's simultaneously to all agencies, but it is 30 days. Sometimes your application will be returned without action. It may be returned without action based on the fact that you didn't answer in those 10 days. So now they're returning it to you. They'll put a notation in there that you need to resubmit once you've had the answer and got the information necessary, because sometimes you need more time than 10 days to respond. It may be returned without action because you submitted the application and it did not require an export license. Sometimes people will self-classify and you will over-classify because you have to be careful and look at the small technical specifications to ensure that you actually fit. You're not trying to be on the Commerce Control List. It's there because you meet the technical specifications. So it's important to make sure you look at all the information, because you overclassify and you submit the application, you've taken more time. So it may be RWA, and at that time they'll tell you, based on the ECCN, no license is required for this destination, but that'll all be explained. And of course, you also have approved and denied for the processing time. Okay, so I don't know why we still have this in there. How does BIS process it? Of course, it goes through BIS review. We get it. It's sent out for interagency review. And we have the escalation procedure. Basically, if it's sent out for interagency clearance, if somebody doesn't agree and we have a dispute as to whether when we want to approve it and maybe state doesn't. So we'll escalate it to the ORC. So then they'll have someone that's on the same level as the director for the OIC, and they'll talk about it and see if they can resolve it. If they can't resolve it, then it's escalated to the next level. And the next level is based on the undersecretaries having conversations. If they can't resolve it, then it's escalated to the next level, at which the chair would be the secretaries of the varying agencies. The final one, if they can't do it, is escalated to the president. I've been here for a long time. I've never seen one sent to the president yet. I don't know who wants to make the president a licensing officer and still keep their job. So it hasn't happened. And of course, you get the final decision. At that point, it's either approved, denied, returned without action. But you get the end of the process. But all told, at least 45 days. If someone's asking you about submitting the application, I generally tell people do 120 days. You don't know what's going to happen. It's easier to come back and say, okay, we finished this early. Oh my, we look good. We got this in, as opposed to coming in and say, you told them 39 days. It says 39 days in the regulations, but nothing's exact. So now you have to go back and say, okay, well, it's not ready. And you go back again, it's not ready, it's not ready. So you build in the time to give yourself a little room to wiggle. Okay. So the rest of the slides that you have with you are just informational. If nothing else, if you have any questions, you can always call Exporter Counseling in Washington, D.C. Our number is 202-482-4811. Just hit 0. It'll go to a counselor. There is no voicemail. Someone is always there from 8 to 5 every day. Okay. And we have our West Coast office, Brian. You can always call him after we close. You can call Brian because he's still there working. His number is, let me see if I can get it right. 949-660-0144. There you go. Okay. So that's it for us. And sorry, we're just a little bit over, but any questions you have, you can always stop past our booth. I have some little flyers here if you want to look at them. it gives you some information about the process itself from inception to shipment, but it's broken down. Okay, thank you.